Hi there, and welcome to Breaking It Down, this podcast from the MS Trust.
I am Helena, and this is my colleague Nick. We both work here at the MS Trust, which is a charity for people affected by MS in the UK. And we are here today to help you make some sense of MS.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the second part of a two-parter, Helena, isn't it? Where we're covering all things driving and MS. So in the first episode, we were looking at the Motability Scheme. And today, we're actually going to be talking more about driving assessments.
Driving assessments, that's something that might cause a bit of anxiety for some people. And to help us understand this topic, Nick spoke to an occupational therapist called Wendy and James, who is a driving assessor. And they've worked together assessing people's driving needs and showing them how to use adaptations to help people with MS to stay on the road.
That's right, Helena. And if you've not heard of a driving assessment before, it could sound a little bit worrying, couldn't it? Sounds like a driving test, essentially, doesn't it? That's where my mind went straight away. Yeah. But just to give a little bit of background for the listeners, if you have a driving license, you have to tell the DVLA, which is the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, that you have MS and you have the diagnosis. So the DVLA will then send you a questionnaire about your driving, and then using that information that you provide, they may then ask you to have a medical examination or a driving assessment.
And if there's no medical reason to prevent you from driving, you'll be allowed to keep your license. But your license may also be changed to short-term medical driving license, and that will be needed to be renewed every 3 to 5 years. We do hear recently, we've heard this a lot in our Facebook group, and also people calling the helpline, that the DVLA can take a few months to reply, and you can drive on your existing license while you're waiting to hear this response.
Yeah, it's really good to know, isn't it, Helena? Because I think sometimes when people sort of start this process and they get a letter through, and it will say changes to the driving license, you might start worrying and thinking, oh, can I drive at the moment? Can I pop down to the shops for a pint of milk? Is my independence gone immediately? So it's really good to know that actually you can still drive while the process is happening. So it's worth noting as well that the DVLA can request that you have a driving assessment, but you can also go and get one yourself. So if you're worried that you might not be safe to drive, or you just want to know sort of what's available in terms of support, in terms of some of the adapted controls, then it can be a good way to get some answers. And it's also worth just mentioning, Helena, as well, that this is a topic that we get so many questions about. On our social media recently, we put up a question saying, what do you want to know about driving an MS? And there was just so much response. People who had been through the process, people who were worried about it, people who weren't sure about what the process would look like. Of course, we get people who have had, very negative experiences, people who've had very positive experiences. So it's one of those topics that we really need to explore a little bit deeper and sort of demystify some of those trickier topics that people aren't sure about. So really excited to jump into the interview and listen to some experts.
Yeah, let's stop waffling and start listening, I think. Let's have a listen to Wendy, James and Nick.
Hi there and welcome back. So we are joined with Wendy and James. So thank you so much for recording with us today. Just before we get going, would you be able to just introduce yourselves for our audience, please? If we start with yourself, Wendy.
Yeah, I'm Wendy. I'm an occupational therapist. Currently I work at the Children's Neuro Centre, but prior to that I did 4 years working with driving assessments at a driving centre.
Amazing, thank you so much. I'm passing on to yourself, James.
Yeah, I'm James. I'm a driving assessor at Motability, assessing fitness to drive and helping people stay independent.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining with us today. So we've got lots and lots of questions to ask you both. So we had lots that came in from the MS community as well, and lots from around this project that we're doing, the Motability project as well. So if we could start with yourself, Wendy, could you tell us a little bit about what might happen in a driving assessment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So initially for a driving assessment, you'd be introduced obviously to the people who are going to be going out for a drive with you, and just find out a little bit about you as a person and what you need to drive for, what you're using a car for, and find out a bit about some of the issues you may or may not be having with driving, whether it be physical or cognitive. And then you would be chatting to I suppose a lot of it is, just finding out a little bit about driving. We'd find out a little bit about whether you were having difficulties physically with using a vehicle, whether it's the pedals, steering, using the handbrake. So just find out a lot more about the drive itself, all within an office. So it would be an informal but formal chat. And there may be that a few tests would be done just to see how your thought processes were going at the time. Nothing particularly to be concerned about, however, because that's more just to find out how you best learn in a situation. So if, for example, you are going to change your driving style because you're having to have adaptations put into the car, it might give the OT and the driving instructor and driving assessor a bit more information on how best to teach you in the future.
Oh, that's fab, thank you. And for anyone who's listening to this who lives with MS, what kind of symptoms might impact their ability to drive?
So a lot of people with MS, it's the loss of sensation in their feet. There's a lot of fear that because they've lost sensation or some strength in their feet, they haven't got the ability to use the brake or the accelerator. So they just worry that their foot's going to slip off, or they misplace where their foot is going, especially in a manual car. So a lot of people do struggle with that and start worrying that they're not going to be able to do an emergency stop quick enough. So that's, I think, one of the biggest ones. Fatigue is another one. So just getting so tired when driving. So a lot of advice would be just, pace yourself. Don't feel that a long journey has to be done all in one. Give yourself a little break here and there. Toileting, going to the loo, obviously urgency is a huge one for a lot of people with MS. And a lot of that, again, the advice would be just look at the journey, see where the toilets are, just check where you can go, and make regular stops so that you can, because, I think if you have got urgency, it can distract you from the drive itself, and that's where an accident is more likely to happen. And, these type of things are the type of advice that would be able to get given when you're out in your driving assessment. It doesn't mean you have to stop driving. It's just, strategies that you can use to make it so that you remain safe. Sometimes if the upper body strength is getting weaker, shoulder strength, there's things that can be adapted in the way of, for steering. So I think everything and anything that you might be experiencing physically can be altered. And, even some of the cognitive changes. So even if you have got brain fog and some memory issues, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stop driving. It just means that you might have to start using a sat nav more often, or have other strategies put into place so that you remain safe.
Absolutely, yeah. So it sounds like there's so much practical advice given as well, and those strategies that you were talking about, Wendy, that's going to support someone to be able to drive.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Access.
And I think the most important thing is that we want, OTs, driving instructors, driving assessment, it's all about maintaining people's independence for as long as possible and keep them behind the wheel for as long as possible. It's not about going for an assessment so we can, rip that license off you. It's all about how can people keep their license for as long as possible and remain safe. Because obviously safety has to come first, but actually there's so many ways to change how you drive to keep you safe. It isn't just about stopping driving.
Yeah, absolutely. And from sort of the side of an OT, what kind of adaptions might drivers be able to access to support them with their driving?
This is type of OT and driving assessors who are at the front of the car as well. So James can help with this answer as well, I think. So there are, I mean, to start off with, pedal-wise, simply going from a manual car to an automatic car might be all that somebody needs to consider. Because then obviously you're taking one foot out. So if your left foot is the one that's, you know, losing sensation or you're struggling with, you don't have to use your left foot with an automatic car, but with a standard manual you do. There are ways of adapting the pedals to make them slightly larger. You might find that you would want to use one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake. So you could change just how you drive a standard automatic car. So that, you know, or you could take your feet out completely and start driving just using your hands. And there are a push-pull, or there's an over-ring. There's lots of different adaptations you can do for accelerating and braking with your arms and your hands instead of your feet. And they're just, you know, the simpler alterations. There are a lot more complex ones as well. But I would say they're probably the most common that we would be looking at.
Brilliant, thank you. From your side, James, is there anything that you would add to that at all?
Really totally agree with what Wendy says. It is all about keeping people independent for as long as possible. From my side of things, we always start with nothing. We consider that most people that come to see us are experienced drivers. So the first thing I would look at is, can we just adapt the driving style to match the change in that medical condition? If the driving style can change a little bit, as Wendy says, moving from manual to automatic, or just changing the way you go about dealing with junctions and roundabouts, that's our job. If we can help change the driving style, in that case, we won't need any physical adaptations to be fitted. But if the physical symptoms are beyond that, then yeah, we can look at modifying the car to suit the individual's needs now and trying to future-proof them a little bit as well.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I think that's really good for people to hear that there are options. You know, if anyone's really worried and listening to this, there are so many options that people can access. So that's brilliant. And coming back to yourself, Wendy, why might someone book a driving assessment?
I suppose really there's a variety of reasons. Some people book because they have a diagnosis. They just want to make sure that they are safe to drive. A lot of it is the confidence that, you know, actually, am I still safe to drive? Should I be driving? And just want that reassurance that actually, yes, it's okay to carry on driving. It's okay. There's a lot of people who their family members are questioning whether or not they should be driving. And so going for a driving assessment just gives them and their family that reassurance that, yes, actually, this is okay. You know, yes, just because you've got fatigue, just because you've got some, you know, foot drop, using adaptations or just changing driving style, you are still safe and you've officially been assessed as safe. Whereas it's not just a family member going, oh, you're a bit fast around that roundabout, you know. So actually it can give you reassurance and the family reassurance that actually it is okay to carry on driving. Sometimes the DVLA will refer people in, and I think James can probably explain that a little bit better than I can. But sometimes the DVLA will request a driving assessment just to make sure that the person remains safe, so through the medical system. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time also people will start thinking, well, I can't drive with my feet, so what's the next option? They might go for Motability, and Motability will then do a referral for a driving assessment to get that advice about what adaptations would be best for that person. So anybody who is on the Motability scheme, they should get an assessment really to work out what best adaptation is going to fit that person. Because it's always advisable to practice using that bit of equipment before you get it fitted to your car, because if it doesn't work, you've spent money, or the Motability will say, oh no, this is it for the next 3 years. So it can be quite important to make sure it works for you and doesn't cause any other issues, another, pain in another area or something. So yeah, I mean, I think it is just reassurance, confidence, and assessment to make sure that what they're using is the right piece of kit, really, to keep yourself safe and keep yourself driving.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. So it's more about helping someone to continue driving, continue their independence.
Yeah.
And supporting people through that. I'm with you there. I'm just curious, is there a cost associated with the driving assessment?
It depends on whereabouts in the country you are.
Okay.
Because I think all driving assessment centres are either, some of them are through the NHS, some of them are voluntary sector. So it depends on whereabouts in the country are to the actual cost. Sometimes there's a cost, sometimes there isn't. If you're referred through the DVLA or through Motability, quite often there is no cost. But if you're self-referring, there sometimes is a small cost. But it's worth discussing with your local driving mobility centre about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned some of these things already, Wendy, but what kind of worries might people bring with them when they're seen for an assessment?
I think the biggest worry is losing their licence.
Yeah.
I think that's there's a huge anxiety that, this is my independence. My mobility has reduced, so actually I rely on my car to access the community, to go to all the different activities that I enjoy. And if I go for an assessment, they're going to take my licence off me. And I think that's the biggest fear that everybody has, that it's not understood how important driving is to them, but reassured that actually the people in that assessment room know exactly how important driving is to you, and will do their utmost to give you the opportunity to stay driving.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. James, if we move over to yourself at this point, could you tell us a little bit more about sort of the practicalities of how the driving assessments are done?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we always start with nothing fitted to a car. We'll always have a clinician sat in the back. So as good as we are as the driving assessors, it's good to have another view, and especially a view from the back seat that looks at what's going on physically with the driver. So if I start bolting a thing onto the car and the clinician sat in the back thinks, no, that's not working, that's putting a muscle group under strain that shouldn't be, that's a real benefit or bonus of having two of us in the car looking at it from different angles. But primarily we start with nothing. If possible, if there's still some ability, we'll ask the client to drive as they have been driving for the last however many years. So as we can see firsthand what difficulties they're having. If they're having no difficulties, then it's just some reassurance. Wendy mentioned earlier family members. Quite often family members might panic. They think, MS is going to stop everyone from driving, so you should stop driving. So they might just want a confidence boost so they can go back to the family and say, look, I've had an assessment, I'm safe, and they're going to keep an eye on me for the next few years as well. If what we see causes too many problems and safety starts to become affected, that's when we can start thinking about adding extra bits onto the car. If it is the legs, the lower limbs that are causing problems, we can utilise the upper limbs. If the upper limbs are not quite strong enough, there's several different things that we can do to the car to make the steering much lighter. Even just looking at different makes and models of cars with different shaped steering wheels to hold on to. Once we find the right method of control and the right way of driving, Wendy mentioned earlier, we quite often send people away to get some tuition. They've been driving with their feet for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. To change their method of control is a big thing. So we send them away for some tuition. Normally that's only maximum of 10 or 15 hours of tuition. And then we'll have a check-in with them after they've had those lessons and make sure that they're now safe, they're comfortable, they're pain-free, and they're managing their symptoms when they're driving. Typically with MS as well, we do like to keep a check-in on people. Quite often, if someone changes their method of control, for example, moving to hand controls, and then they start experiencing problems, they'll then hang the keys up and say, well, I've given it a good go. I've tried hand controls for a couple of years. That's now not working. I'll give up. But we like to have a check-in just to say there are other systems that we can use. Typically, most people with MS will be on a medical driving license, a 3-year license. And I would always advise someone to come back and see us at least every 3 years, have a review of your driving, and then you can send our report to the DVLA with your reapplication. And all going well, the DVLA will just file that and be grateful.
Okay, yeah, so I'm with you. So there's, I mean, I was just thinking whenever I have to sort of drive a different car on the wrong side of the road or anything like that, it does take a long time to get used to, doesn't it? So actually, if you complete, because I don't know, for me, I know the gear sticks on my left, and that's where I'm always reaching for. But if you suddenly you start to drive more with your hands or something like that, you probably have all of those sort of built-in memory and muscle memory from the way that you used to drive. So actually knowing that there's some tuition available as well, you don't just say, right, you've got this adaptation, off you go. There's actually steps along the process to make you more confident using those adaptations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We want people to feel confident when they get in the car. We want it to be second nature, as it has been for many years. If you're having to get in a car and seriously think about every movement before you do that movement, then it's not an actual drive, and that's when mistakes will start to happen and potentially things can go wrong. So that's where the tuition will help to build that confidence, to make it second nature. How do I slow down? We shouldn't have to think about that. It should be, I need to slow down, and all of a sudden the car is slowing. And that's one of the things that will be dealt with during the period of tuition.
That's brilliant. And I'm getting the idea, James, that this isn't like your driving test that you do when you first learn to drive. So it's not a kind of a pass-fail situation.
Absolutely not. The actual driving assessment, and once someone's had tuition, we will get them to drive a standardised assessment route. But we're really not interested in any habits that someone might have. We can give a little bit of advice throughout that drive as well. If someone's, for example, coming into roundabouts a little bit quick and then having to brake hard, we can give advice on how to deal with that more appropriately. Whereas a driving test, if you come into a roundabout too quickly, you're potentially going to fail. Even on that final assessment with us, we can say to people, we can see it's good, we can see you're much better than you were last time we saw you. It's not quite good enough yet. Have another couple of lessons and specifically work on these areas to get it improved. And again, that will be backed up with a full written report, which that person could take to a potential driving instructor and say, this is what I need to work on. Forget the rest of it. This is what needs to get better.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And you did touch on this earlier, but what do you always kind of pass this information on to the DVLA?
If the person has referred themselves, or if they've come in through Motability, we can pass it on to DVLA, but ultimately it's the person's responsibility. If we're concerned about safety or concerned that the person's going to ignore our recommendations and that would be unsafe, then we can pass on to DVLA, but that happens very, very rarely. If the DVLA have asked somebody to come in, which is possible, then of course the report will go directly to the DVLA.
Yeah, I'm with you. And what would the DVLA do with the information once they have it?
Well, Well, first of all, once you're diagnosed with MS, it is a responsibility of the driver to inform DVLA of that diagnosis. Quite often, as long as there's no concerns, the DVLA will just log that information. They may contact the person's consultant or even GP for their advice. And as long as that information comes back to DVLA that there's no concerns, MS is not affecting them in a way that could impact driving, the DVLA will just probably put them on a 3-year driving license for a regular review. If they've had to come in for a driving assessment, either referred themselves or DVLA's asked for it, the DVLA has their own medical team with doctors and nurses. They'll review what we've done on assessment and they'll make the final decisions based on the information that we've given them and the information they've received from doctors.
Fantastic. And if someone's kind of listening to this and thinking, I'm not sure what I actually need to inform my insurance company about, would you have any recommendations?
Absolutely, always inform the insurance company. Again, you can use our report to send it to the insurance company. That's saying I've taken responsibility for things myself. I've been assessed, I'm safe. But any change in your medical condition or any alterations you make to your car, the insurance company must be informed. Based on that, some people are a little bit cautious or worried that the insurance company is going to absolutely crucify them with charging more money. They're not allowed to do that. So just because you have a medical condition, the insurance company cannot charge you more money. If you've got some very expensive adaptations fitted to your car, the cost of the value of your car has increased, so they may charge you more in that case. But they can't charge you more simply because you've got a medical condition. That's not allowed, that's discrimination.
That's really, really helpful to know. I think that was one of the sort of number one questions that we had from the MS community was, will my diagnosis, will going for a driving assessment impact the cost of my insurance? So just to be really clear there, the insurance company are not allowed to hike that insurance due to your medical condition, basically.
If anything, it could go down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anything, the cost of the insurance could go down. If you can prove that you're a safe driver, then why would the insurance company charge you more? You've demonstrated that you're a very safe driver and you've ticked all the boxes for a driving mobility centre.
Fantastic. Yeah, and actually, as you said, James, you're taking that step to show that you're a responsible driver and that you've gone that extra mile to do everything within your power to show that you're sort of safe on the road. Yeah, fab. Thank you so much. So we did have a couple of questions from the MS community. So that was one of them actually that we've just sort of discussed there. But so this can be for both of you, Wendy and James. So other than informing the DVLA and your insurers, is there anything else that you should be obligated to do as a person with MS who drives?
I don't think there's nothing official that you need to do apart from the DVLA and insurance. And I think really it's just to just be mindful of your own ability, keep in check. And if you have any concerns or you just, actually, I'm not so sure, even if it was only 6 months since you had your last driving assessment, contact your driving assessment centre and say, actually, I'm not so sure this is still working for me. Can I have another assessment? And there's no limit to how many you can have. It doesn't impact anything. It doesn't impact your license or anything. It just shows that you're being responsible. So I think it was just keep in check for yourself what your skills are, and if you have any concerns or if you're a bit worried, just go back and ask. Don't be afraid of asking. I think that would be the main thing.
Yeah, that sounds like some really, really helpful advice. So just keep going back, manage it yourself as you would do, managing your safety, managing any adaptations that you have. And you're not obligated to do these things, but actually it could support you further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maintain that independence as
Yeah.
well, and being able to drive and get out and about, and all of those things that kind of open up as well.
And I think one of the things that we haven't really mentioned is, obviously we're talking about driving, but one of the really important things about driving is getting in and out of the car. And if you're using any walking aid or wheelchair, actually how are you going to stow that? How are you going to get in and out of the car? And I think that's something, when you go for a driving assessment, that will also be looked at. So it's not just about how you drive, it's how you access the car. How can you get in and out? Do you need any support? Are there any other aids and adaptations that can be done to make it easier to get in and out of the car? Does the chair need to be adapted? Do you need separate cushions? There's a lot more to a drive than just getting behind the wheel and going from A to B. There's the access as well. And stowing of the wheelchair, like I say, if you are a wheelchair user, where do you put the wheelchair when you drive? Because there's no point in somebody else putting it in the boot, because when you get the other end, you need that other person to get it out of the boot. So actually you need to try and see how you can maintain that independence fully. And that's all something that can be included in that driving assessment, not just the drive itself. So if you're not worried about the drive at all, you could still get advice about the access if that's one of the issues that you're having.
That's really helpful to know. And I was just thinking, Wendy, if someone changes their mobility aid as well, so they go to, a powered wheelchair or something like that, would you recommend speaking to the driving assessors at that point?
Absolutely, because I think, if you go from a manual to a powered, obviously the powered wheelchairs are so much heavier. And again, there's other options. There are hoists that you can get that, get the wheelchair into the boot for you. But you might find actually you need to rethink the type of vehicle, and you might want a wheelchair accessible vehicle that you can drive from, the wheelchair itself. Because some powered wheelchairs, if they're crash tested and they've got head support, you can actually stay in that chair and it will take you to the steering wheel, if that's what you're using at the time. And you can drive from your wheelchair, so you don't have to do the transfer at all. So it's those type of things that it's definitely worth contacting a driving centre about. But also that at that point you would think that hope that somebody's on a higher level PIP, and it might be that Motability is the route to go through to get that vehicle, because then obviously they are high cost, those type of vehicles, and a lot of that cost will be taken on by the Motability Scheme.
Amazing, thank you. That's really, really helpful. I guess we've mentioned this a few times, but this kind of 3-year cycle that people have, where they renew their license every 3 years as part of this. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, James?
Yeah, like I said earlier, there is a legal obligation to inform DVLA of a diagnosis of MS, along with many other medical conditions. For the most part, as long as there is no concern, DVLA will do nothing with that information. And especially if you've taken responsibility and you've had a driving assessment, the DVLA will be quite confident normally that you are managing everything yourself, and should there be a change, you'll notify them. At the end of that 3-year period, or about 6 months before, the DVLA will simply write to you and say your license needs to be renewed. There'll be a questionnaire on there about your medical condition and any potential changes that you've been through. And they may ask or may inform you that they need to contact your doctor or consultant. As long as everything is in place and they've got no concerns, they'll simply reissue that driving license. If there are some concerns, and even if there's some concerns following a driving assessment, it's possible that the DVLA will reduce that to a 1-year license. So they'll say, we can see that your medical condition has changed. We're now going to review you annually rather than every 3 years, just to make sure that everything is still safe and above board. So as scared as most people are of the DVLA, they have got their own strategies, if you like, for managing people's medical conditions. Unfortunately, their letter writing is not the best, and it's quite abrupt and quite threatening at times. But they just want to get straight to the point. You need to do this, this, and this, and do it quickly. Is generally how their letters are written. But if you've got the backing of someone like Wendy, an OT or a clinician, if you've got the backing of a driving mobility centre, and if you've got the backing of your own medical team, your doctors and consultants, then DVLA would probably leave you alone.
That's really helpful. And just really clear, I know we mentioned this earlier, but that 3-year cycle, so someone had the question, it does renewing your license every 3 years, will that impact their insurance in any way?
No, it's exactly the same thing.
So it's nothing to worry about from an insurance side of things.
No.
Gotcha. Absolutely, that's fantastic. I think that's covered all of the questions that we had that came in. As I said, there was lots and lots of people who were asking those questions basically. So I would say they were sort of the biggest ones were insurance, what you need to tell the DVLA, and a little bit about the driving assessments themselves, which we've covered. So it's clearly something that people are really interested in and want to know more about. So it's been great talking to you both. I was just wondering, just before we kind of say goodbye to you both, would you have any kind of final comments or thoughts for anyone who's listening to this and who's still sort of a bit worried or not sure about driving assessments, insurance, that type of thing? Anything to kind of leave people with?
I mean, I think a lot of people, I'm not sure if they are aware of the driving mobility, which is like an overall charity that covers the whole country. That if they have any questions, that they can just make a phone call to their local centre. If they just Google driving mobility, they'll find their local centre, and they're usually happy to answer any questions, whether it's about driving. Quite a lot of them have got hubs where they can talk about alternative transport as well. So if they want to know more about how to get on and off a bus or that type of stuff, the driving mobility centres are all there to support people to stay as independent as possible in a variety of different travel, but mainly it is obviously driving. So if people have any questions or any concerns about DVLA or insurance, just give them a call, and they'll be able to help and answer those questions for them.
That's really helpful to know. We'll make sure that we link to the driving mobility charity in our show notes as well. And yourself, James, anything from sort of your side of the assessment to leave?
Yeah, just ask for help. Even if you don't think you need it now, just ask for help, contact driving mobility, and just say to them, I've got this diagnosis, I'd like some help, I'd like some support, and we'll do everything that we can to help that journey be as smooth as possible. Also for relatives, we see quite a lot of relatives of people with MS that they're trying to lift heavy wheelchairs in and out the car on their own. They're trying to do everything possible for the person that's got the medical condition. But we'll even look at the relative and say, if you carry on doing this, you're going to end up with quite a serious injury, and then you're going to be of no assistance to your loved ones. We'll help them as well.
That's really good to know. So it's that sort of holistic approach as well to the journey as well, and to the people around that as well.
I think most importantly, I think is that actually a driving assessment is about keeping people driving. It's not about taking a license away. It's about keeping people independent, keeping them driving, keeping them doing what they enjoy for as long as possible and as long as safe.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's been so helpful, and I've learned so much as well from you both. So thank you so much for giving up your time to speak with us. That's been amazing. Thank you, Wendy and James. Thank you.
We've reached that point now in the podcast where if this was a commercial podcast, there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do adverts. So we would like to instead take this opportunity to tell you all about our own resources that we have for people with MS.
That's right, Helena. So if you go over to our website, which is mstrust.org.uk, on there you'll find loads of information about life with MS. Specifically, if you want to know more about driving, you can head to our A to Z page and go to D for driving. And on there, you'll see lots of information about lots of the things that we've been talking about today. It's also worth mentioning just here that we are a charity. We are not funded by the NHS. We are not funded by the government. We do rely solely on the generosity of our donors. So to keep this podcast going and to do the vital work that the MS Trust does, where we fund MS nurses, we train MS health professionals, we produce lots and lots of really helpful information about life with MS, including lots around the time of diagnosis. These things are only possible because of the generosity of our supporters. So if you would like to support the MS Trust, please do head over to the donate page and consider leaving us a donation. We'll link to that page in the show notes. Thank you.
So that was all about driving assessments. Do you know, I find this so interesting. You were saying about feeling like driving tests. Now, I don't drive myself. I have taken a few driving tests, and I know how daunting and scary that could be. And I feel like actually listening to Wendy and James talk about it, it did sort of put me at ease listening to it, just thinking that actually this is here to help people and not to stop people, which I think it's really important to know, really.
Yeah, absolutely, Helena. That was the key theme that I took away from talking to Wendy and James, was that actually they're there to support people and they want you to be independent. They want you to be able to stay on the road for as long as you can safely, and there are options. You know, if you need the adaptations, that's an option. If you need support with a different type of vehicle, that's an option. There are heaps and heaps of things that you can do and that they can support you with.
One thing that I kept on thinking about when we were recording this is we said at the start about the DVLA will sort of you have to tell the DVLA if you have MS. And once you get diagnosed with MS, it's not actually that many things that you have to do according to the law, but the DVLA you have to tell. And a few years back, actually, one of my friends got diagnosed with MS, and I think she almost found it harder, I would say, when she had that letter from the DVLA saying that they wanted to change her driving license to like this shorter form one, rather than when she actually was diagnosed. I mean, obviously that was traumatizing, but she just really felt it hit home that she now had a condition that was going to change her life. And I know she was in tears. She was so frustrated about this. So I think this is something that really, really does affect people, and it really kind of push buttons to make them think about their independence. So I think it's actually the idea of having a driving assessment, because you said it's the DVLA can order them, but you can also ask to have one yourself. It's probably not a bad idea to actually know that you can do this. There are options out there to help you stay on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another key point there, Helena, is that actually, in a lot of cases, the DVLA, you'll go through that process with, your neurologist or your team, and actually it's fairly straightforward. But again, it must be that reality of like, oh, okay, this is really going to impact my life in a very real, tangible way. Having not been through diagnosis, I don't know what that's like, but I'm imagining that must be quite a difficult process to go through. To you get diagnosed and you start sort of imagining all kinds of things, what life's going to be like in the future and your family and all that type of thing, and then straight away, this is something that you have to deal with, and it's something that's linked to your independence and your life. A lot of people rely on drive. A lot of people live in very remote areas, and you start thinking, well, can I still do the things that I love to do? Can I still see people?
And it's not really helped by that there has been such a long waiting time to get your answers from the DVLA as well. So, because that is one of the questions that we keep on getting, like, when am I supposed to be getting my answer? What's going on? Can I drive? And as we know, you are allowed to drive on your license while you are waiting for the answers from the DVLA. So at least that's something. So we really hope that this podcast was useful for you. This is, like I said, we've done 2 parts about driving and MS, first one being Motability and now driving assessment. But what if you're like me, who's not driving and you mostly rely on public transport, or the husband driving? But you'll be glad to know that a little further down the line, later on in the year, we are going to be doing a podcast around public transport and MS and getting around that, because that's a whole different thing to navigate around.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm looking forward to those podcasts too, Helena, and looking at what's available in terms of public transport too. So if you do have a question about driving, public transport, or any other aspect of life with MS, you can contact our helpline team. They're available Monday to Friday, apart from UK bank holidays, and you can get hold of them between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Outside of those hours, if you do call, you can, of course, leave us a message and they will get back to you as soon as they can. So the number for the helpline team is 0800 032 039 039. If you'd rather not talk to someone about the issue that you're having, if you'd rather send an email, that's also okay. You can pop them an email. That's ask@mstrust.org.uk. And we will, of course, link to the helpline page in the show notes too.
And as well as being available on email and the helpline, we are also on social media. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, and Instagram. This podcast is available where you would normally find your podcasts, like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon. We love it when you like and subscribe. And also, we love it when you give us a review. So, because more reviews means that we reach more people, and then we can hopefully make some sense of MS to more people out there in the world. So if you do have the time to give us a review, we would really appreciate that. And while you're at it and you're out there, why don't you tag us in some photos in you out and about with your car? And have you maybe had a driving assessment? Maybe let us know what that's like. Please get in touch and share your story.